In this video, let's take a look at how we can create a 3D virtual product rotation that allows the user to see the product from all different angles. So in this example, I'm going to be using a plugin called Sophie 3D, and it's an excellent Flash plugin. It's all ActionScript based and it's pretty easy to use. So I've downloaded this plugin from Sophie 3D and I'm going to be using that in this example. Now when you first download the project files, you're going to get some folders similar to these plus some additional content. I've actually deleted out and slightly modified this version of the Flash project to try and simplify things a little bit. But there's two main components we're interested in. The first is the base project FLA file, and that really has the guts of the Sophie 3D content. And then next there's the model folder, and that's where we're going to place our external 3D models for use with this plugin. So we have the content that allows us to do this. Now we need a model. So I've got a model here made by a student, and it's just a hand modeled in 3D, and it's got a single texture file. And that texture is just a JPEG texture file. So if I were to look at the hypershade here in Maya and look at the texture file that I've got associated with this, go to textures, and we can see that it's just a JPEG texture file here. I can actually view this file. We can just see that it's a standard UV map with texture applied. So the way to do this in Maya is we need to export this as an OBJ file. So I'm going to go to, first of all I need to make sure I've actually got the OBJ plugin installed. So I'm going to go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. And if I scroll down, I want to make sure that OBJ export is loaded and set to auto load. I can click Close, and then with my object selected, File, Export Selection, and I'm going to place this, let's see, I'm going to throw it on my desktop, and inside that folder that I was looking at before, inside the model folder, and I'm going to set my file type to OBJ export, and I'm going to call the file itself Start Project with a capital P. And the reason for that is because the scripts by default in Sophie 3D are set up to use that file name, and it's just easier that way. So I'm going to click Export Selection. It's going to go ahead and export it, and then let's take a look at that folder again. Look inside the model folder, and we can see it's exported the JPEG diffuse file, the texture. We've got the material file, which is to do with OBJ files, and then we've got the actual 3D OBJ file itself. So that's how we do it in Maya. If you're using 3D Studio, the process is fairly similar. So here in 3D Studio, I've got this same file loaded up. I'm going to select the hand, go to my application menu, export, export selected, and I would do the same thing. I would say I would like to export this to my 3D model folder, and I would call it the same name, Start Project or OBJ. And then from the type menu, just make sure that you have OBJ exporter selected. And you can just click on Save, and I'm going to replace the file that I just created from Maya. Click Yes. Leave everything at the default, just click Export. And then when it's finished exporting, just click on Done, and you have your file exported as a non-native OBJ file format. Let's jump into Flash then, and what I'm going to do is load up the base project.fla file from my 3D folder. And this is just the default one that comes with Sophie 3D. Just click Open. It tells you that it's missing fonts. Don't worry, just click OK. And that gives me this default Sophie 3D file, which looks pretty empty when you first open it. You've just got this loading graphic here. You've got some instructions telling you how to rotate the 3D object. The bulk of the file, as far as loading our model, is actually on the timeline. You can see you've got this actions layer on frame 1. Let's right click and go to actions. And you can see we've got all this action script here. which is actually using the Sophie 3D action script to create a 3D scene and load in our 3D file. Now, the majority of this is using content which is in this Sophie 3D underscore version 4 object here, which contains most of the action script to do the complex stuff that we don't really need to worry about. We've also got this font and then some various loading graphics here, the loading symbols, which are this guy here. So by default, because I have a model inside the model folder, it's very important to make sure it's inside this model folder. If I just go ahead and compile this now, just by doing Control-Enter, you can see that it actually loads in my model without any fuss at all. The material looks a bit strange because that's the way I exported it from 3D Studio. I didn't set up my material properly. But you can see that the hand loads in absolutely fine. It's looking very glossy. You can see my instructions tell me that I just click and drag to rotate. If I hold the Shift key, I can zoom in and out. And if I hold the space bar with the left key, I can pan it left and right. So really, it's as simple as that. You've loaded in your 3D object, and Sophie 3D is taking care of the rest. However, what do you do if you have an existing project that you need to import this content into? And that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to do a brand new project, and you can just use an existing project if you have one. I'll do a new ActionScript 3 project, and say I had a scene that was called 3D Spin. In order to import this, I need to do a couple of things. Firstly, I need to go back to my base project, and I'm going to select everything from the base project library. Right click, copy, then go to my new project, right click, paste. So I've brought all that guts of the Sophie 3D project in. You'll notice that my stage is set up differently. It's got a white background, it's got a different size. That doesn't matter, it's going to work anyway. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go back to the base project and we'll look at the timeline. What I'm interested in are these two layers that are here, the ActionScript layer and then the layer with the text and loading screen content. So I'm going to Control select both of those keyframes, right click, copy frames, then go back to the new document, frame 1, right click, paste frames. And all I'm doing is pasting the loading screen or the loading graphic and then these instructions here. In fact, it might be a good idea in this case to double click the instructions. We could just change the color of the font maybe to black this time, and then we can see those on my white background. Now, if you were to try and run this now, even though you've imported the necessary content and the necessary frames, if you were to try and run it, you're going to receive an error. This is just a font message. We can just click OK to ignore that. Now the error tells us that it basically can't find the 3D file. It can't find the OBJ file. And that's because this is an untitled document. So what I need to do is I need to save this into that all-important folder setup. Here's the original base project folder or file. I can call this anything I want. I can call it Test 3D. Click Save. And now, because it's got a specific location, it knows that it can find that model folder. When I run it, everything works as expected. And you can see we've got our hand loading up, and I can rotate it and move it around. I can hold down Shift to zoom, I can hold down space and left click to move that around. And so our 3D object is being imported into our brand new project. And it's as simple as that. Once you've got that set up, you're good to go. You can continue refining this. You can add extra content into this. If I wanted to add extra graphics, I can just draw those in like I normally would. And it loads up that file with that new graphic in place. It's really very simple to use and a very nice tool. So give it a go. See if you can use Soapy 3D to bring in your pre-existing 3D files into your Flash content.